As soon as I parked my motorhome in my own garage, Karen, the president of the HOA, appeared at my door with her clipboard and a fake smile. "You can't leave that there. It's against the rules." I explained that it was my property, but she insisted that neighborhood aesthetics took priority. Days later, the fines, threatening letters, and even attempts to tow my motorhome began. But if Karen thought I was going to give in, she was sorely mistaken. Moving to an orderly neighborhood seemed like a dream. Clean streets, aligned houses, manicured lawns. It all seemed like a good deal. At least until I found out that this apparent perfection was supported by a butt-ugly creature called Karen, the HOA's dictator. My first interaction with her happened as soon as I parked my motorhome in the garage. It was mine, paid for, beautiful, and suitable for weekend trips. I hadn't even cooled down the engine properly when I noticed that figure emerging from the shadows like a ghost from a condo meeting. She was determined, with a clipboard in her hand and a look that mixed indignation with pleasure in bossing others around. She approached my door with that way of someone who thinks she was born with a crown on her head, and knocked 3 times, dry and firm. Not a normal knock, but the kind of knock that makes it clear that the visit is about business. "Good afternoon. I'm the president of the HOA," she said, with a smile that seemed to stick to her face. "I noticed you parked a recreational vehicle in your driveway." "I did?" She practically ran out of the house as soon as she heard the engine turn off. I replied something basic like, "Yes, it's mine, it's in my garage," and at the same time, I saw her smile falter a little. It was the typical case of a person used to seeing others bow their heads before their fifth-rate authority. "That's right," she continued, as if she were explaining quantum physics to me. "Our community regulations don't allow this type of vehicle to be parked in front of houses." I stopped for a second. I wasn't in the street, I wasn't on the sidewalk, I wasn't in anyone's way. It was in my garage. I let out a short laugh, already feeling the prank unfolding. "But it's my property, right?" She didn't even blink. "Yes, but there are guidelines that guarantee the visual harmony of the neighborhood. And a motorhome? Well, it can cause a certain dissonance." There you go. Visual dissonance. The wretched vehicle was standing still, quietly, doing no harm to anyone. And she was talking as if I'd put a flashing billboard advertising cheap beer and cabaret dancers right in the middle of the neighborhood. "I'll have to ask you to remove it," she decreed, with that tone that elementary school teachers use to tell children that playtime is over. "Of course. Just take this multi-ton piece of junk and teleport it where the lady wouldn't have to look at it." I shook my head and made it short. "I'm not taking it off." She blinked rapidly, as if she wasn't used to receiving such a direct no. "Well then, I'm afraid I'll have to send formal notice." And so began my journey through HOA hell. Over the next few days, I started to find little treats left by her in my mailbox. First, a polite letter asking for the removal of the invasive vehicle. Then, an official notice saying that I was violating the community rules. Then, a fine. Yes, a damn fine for parking in my own garage. I tried to ignore it. After all, who on earth would have any power over what I do on my own property? But then, the escalation began. One fine morning, I went out to work and found a new sign on the lawn in front of my house. Restricted parking. HOA-approved vehicles only. I looked at it as if I'd just found a pink pony in the middle of the street. Was that serious? Had she had a sign installed just to tease me? I tore off the damn sign and threw it in the trash. The answer came quickly. The next day, a second fine. And the next, a warning that my vehicle could be towed away if the violation persisted. Now it was no longer a question of where I was going to park the motorhome. It was a question of principles. If that woman wanted a war, I was ready to fight back. I thought I'd dealt with enough unbearable people in my life. I've worked with narcissistic bosses. I've had neighbors who listened to loud music at dawn. I've been approached by financial pyramid salesmen trying to convince me that I needed to change my mindset for success. But this woman took the art of disruption to a whole new level. After the first few fines, I thought the HOA would give up when it saw that I simply wasn't going to give in. But I underestimated the pleasure some people get from picking a fight where they don't have to. First, the anonymous complaints began. I started receiving notifications from the HOA about absurd things such as lawn with irregular growth. I had cut the grass 2 days before. Garbage placed on the sidewalk before the permitted time, I hadn't even put anything out, and lack of aesthetic harmony in the decoration of the facade. Why? Because my door was blue and not beige like everyone else's? But the big blow came when I woke up one morning and found a piece of paper stuck to my motorhome. TOW notice, violation of community guidelines. It was official. The bitch was really trying to get rid of my vehicle. I came home gritting my teeth and went straight to the computer. I needed to see exactly what these damn guidelines were that she was citing so much. I opened the HOA website, searched for the documents, and after a long battle against badly formatted PDFs and legal language worthy of a forbidden spell, I found the section on recreational vehicles. And that's when I realized how dirty this woman was playing. The rule mentioned that motorhomes cannot be parked on the street or in common areas of the neighborhood. Period. Not a single line mentioned private garages. None at all. She was counting on the fact that most people never read these regulations. They just take the HOA's word as supreme law. That was it. If this woman wanted a fight, then she was going to get one. I picked up my phone and called the HOA office directly. An assistant answered with that tone of voice of someone who was hired to be polite, but actually wanted to be anywhere else. Good morning. I'd like to speak to the president of the HOA. Ms. Karen is busy at the moment. Can I take a message? Oh, I'm sure she's busy. She must be very committed to her mission of turning this neighborhood into an aesthetic concentration camp. Tell her I've read the guidelines, and I'm waiting for my apology. Silence. Sir, can I help you in any other way? Yes, you can. You can tell her that if my motorhome disappears from my garage, I'll file a lawsuit for trespassing. The guy didn't know what to say for a while, then mumbled, I'll pass it on, and hung up. I thought this would at least put a stop to the clowning, but I underestimated the woman's dictator spirit. Not only did she ignore my threat, she took the game to another level. 2 days later, when I left for work, I noticed something strange. An unfamiliar car was parked across the street, pointed directly at my house. And inside, a guy holding a clipboard and writing things down. Yes, she had hired someone to monitor me. That night, while I was preparing a coffee strong enough to wake a dead man, I received an email from the HOA. It was a final warning. It said that if I didn't remove my motorhome within 48 hours, official action would be taken against me. I laughed out loud, alone, sitting in my kitchen, holding the cup. Did she really think she was going to break me with an ultimatum? If there's one thing that motivates me more than anything else, it's when someone thinks they can intimidate me with red tape and empty threats. So, I decided to respond on the same level. The next day, I took copies of the part of the regulations that proved I was right and took them directly to the HOA office. I entered without knocking, walked up to the receptionist's desk, and dropped the papers there. This is for Karen. Tell her that if she wants to continue with this joke, I'm ready to take her to court. The woman took the papers and looked at me like someone looking at a madman. You can just send it by email. I'd rather she saw my face when she found out she'd lost. I turned my back and left before they could answer me. But of course, that was only the beginning, because Karen wasn't the type to accept losing, and I already knew that she was going to try some dirty trick to regain control. I was ready for a fight. After dropping the papers in the HOA's face, proving that Karen had no legal basis to force me to move the motorhome out of my garage, I thought she would swallow her defeat and move on. But no, of course not. The woman must have had an altar in her house dedicated to the HOA, with lit candles and a picture of herself holding a clipboard. She couldn't accept losing. She couldn't just admit she'd made a mistake and leave me alone. So instead of backing down, she did what any neighborhood dictator would do. She resorted to dirty tricks. The first was an absurd denunciation of structural danger. Yes, that's right. Out of the blue, I received a notice saying that an HOA inspection had identified possible safety hazards in my house due to the weight of the motorhome in the garage. I almost fell off my chair when I read it. She was trying to argue that the weight of my vehicle could compromise the structure of the house. It was so ridiculous that I didn't even know where to start. My garage was built to hold one car. The motorhome weighed no more than a large pickup truck. It was the most lame excuse I'd ever seen in my life. But the best? The notice said I needed to allow an official HOA inspection of my property within a week. But of course, they wanted to come into my house. Right then and there, I imagined Karen laughing to herself as she typed this crap into her computer, already dreaming of finding something to fine me for. Well, that wasn't going to happen. I sent a short, blunt email to the HOA. I do not authorize any inspection of my property. Any attempt to gain access will be considered trespassing. Good luck trying to prove that a parked motorhome can bring down a house. But Karen wasn't going to stop there. If she couldn't get to me legally, she was going to try to give me hell in other ways. And so, over the next week, the constant visits from the city inspectors began. First, there was a guy from the town hall claiming that there was a complaint about a pest infestation in my house. Yes, now I was breeding rats, apparently. Then another official came to check on drainage problems in my yard. And the next day, yet another came to check on misuse of residential property. The woman was desperate. I could even picture the scene. Karen, sitting in her living room, calling every department in the city, making up ridiculous complaints to try to bend me over. But you know what happens when you push too hard? When you play so many false cards that, at some point, you end up exposing your own game? That's right. I'd had enough of the clowning and decided to fight back. If Karen wanted to play whistleblower, I was going to play the game better than her. I spent days gathering information about her and her beloved rules. I talked to neighbors who also had problems with the HOA and discovered some interesting things. First, the woman fined selectively. Some houses were clearly outside the rules she so rigidly imposed on me, but they never received notifications. One of them, her best friend's house. Secondly, Karen liked to circumvent her own rules when it suited her. I discovered that her garage was a veritable dumping ground for junk, completely against the HOA's outside organization rules. And, best of all, she herself had a larger-than-allowed vehicle parked hidden at the back of the house. I had gold on my hands, so I did what any sensible person would do. I took photos of everything, of her car, of the mess in the garage, of the houses that were outside the rules and never received notifications. Then I put together a dossier and sent it to the same city departments that had been sent to check up on me. But I didn't stop there. I also sent everything to the HOA itself, denouncing the president for abuse of authority, favoritism, and failure to comply with community guidelines. The irony. 2 days later, I saw an HOA car parked in front of her house. An inspector got out and knocked on the door. I watched from the window, smiling. The look on her face when she opened the door and realized she was being inspected? Unforgettable. The woman who kept stuffing fines in my mailbox was now on the other side of the story. But the best part was yet to come. Because I knew that Karen wasn't going to accept this humiliation without trying to strike one last blow. But I was already ready for that. If Karen was already beside herself with my previous refusals, now, with inspectors knocking on her door and neighbors starting to notice her hypocrisy, she must have been on the edge of sanity. I could see the movements. In the days following the counterattack, she walked around the neighborhood faster than a cockroach when the light comes on, holding that clipboard like a sword. She would stop to whisper with the residents closest to her, hold urgent meetings with the rest of the HOA, and cast glances that, if they had the power, would have charred me to the sidewalk. But the pinnacle came when I received her final card, an official summons from the HOA, demanding that I attend a conduct hearing. Yes, that's right. The woman was so desperate to bend me over that she now wanted to drag me to a formal meeting to discuss my failure to abide by community guidelines. Oh, I wouldn't have missed that for the world. When the day arrived, I walked into the HOA office as if I were going to a comedy show. The place had that typical soulless decor, beige furniture, gray carpet, and a coffee machine that had probably never been cleaned since it opened. As I entered the meeting room, I saw Karen sitting at the head of the table, hands folded, with a victorious smile on her face. Next to her, a few other HOA members, all of them with that posture of someone who had already been convinced that I was the great villain of the neighborhood. I sat down leisurely and waited for the clowning to begin. "You've been called here to clarify your continued violation of community rules," Karen began, in a tone that she clearly found intimidating. "Your actions have caused discomfort for the neighbors and disrespected the rules of coexistence." I smiled. "Funny you should say that, because as far as I remember, there's no rule prohibiting parking motorhomes in your own garage." Karen blinked rapidly, but kept her disguise. "Well, there are certain interpretations that—" "Interpretations?" I interrupted, taking out a printed copy of the regulations and throwing it on the table. "I brought the document here, since you seem to have a short memory. There's no clause prohibiting what I'm doing. So why exactly are we here?" An awkward silence filled the room. I saw a few HOA members exchanging glances, but Karen hadn't given up yet. "You've also accumulated multiple misconduct infractions, including confrontations with HOA members and hostile behavior with neighbors." "Ah, that's a good one. You mean when I defended myself against your false accusations? Or when I refused to let you make my home a target for your abuse of power?" She swallowed. "But the icing on the cake came when I opened the folder I'd brought with me and distributed copies of my dossier to everyone present. Speaking of breaches of conduct," I continued, in an almost casual tone, "I wanted to take advantage of this meeting to present some irregularities that seem to have gone unnoticed. And that's when I began to list, in detail and with proof, all the infractions committed by Karen herself. Here are photos of the HOA president's garage, clearly in violation of the rules of external organization. Here we have an unauthorized vehicle parked on her property, something that should be findable, right?" The HOA members flipped through the papers, some frowning. Karen was as red as a rotten tomato. "And here," I continued, picking up another document, "we have a survey of selective complaints. Note that some houses have never been fined, even though they were outside the rules. And what a curious thing, these houses belong to personal friends of our dear president." At this point, Karen was about to explode. "This is a personal attack," she fired, completely losing her composure. "You have no right to—" "Have no right to what?" I cut her off, looking directly at the other HOA members. "To expose the truth? Because it seems that the only person flouting the rules here is her." The final blow came when I mentioned that I had already sent all this evidence to the city inspectors, and that some investigations were being opened into how fines and sanctions were being applied in the neighborhood. The room erupted into chaos. Some members started whispering among themselves. One of them snorted and said that it was necessary to review certain policies. Another suggested that it might be interesting to reconsider some of the fines imposed in recent months. And Karen? She stood there, not knowing whether to scream, cry, or simply evaporate from existence. The meeting ended without any sanctions against me. In fact, it ended with an emergency review of the HOA's policies. And a few days later, the news came. Karen had been removed as HOA president. The woman went berserk. She sent angry emails, tried to convince her neighbors to protest, and even distributed flyers around the neighborhood, saying that they were trying to destroy the order of the community. But it was too late. The blow was so accurate that even her few allies drifted away. In the following months, peace finally returned to the neighborhood. The HOA, without Karen in charge, was much calmer. The rules still existed, but now they were applied fairly. And the motorhome? Oh, It was still parked in my garage. Every time I came home and saw that white monster parked there, it gave me indescribable pleasure. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a symbol of my victory over the dethroned queen of the HOA. And even better, I could imagine Karen sitting in her house, looking out the window and foaming with rage. A true work of art. What did you think of this video? Leave a comment and a like.